Hugh Keynes. Good evening, everyone. As you already know, my name is Hugh Keynes. Have you heard of intermittent fasting? According to many people, intermittent fasting is simply starving yourself to lose weight. But in reality, intermittent fasting actually has several potential health benefits besides just helping you to maintain a healthy body weight. For more information, I found an article from the New York Times dated March 4th, 2020, in which Professor of Science Nutrition Policy Alice H. Lichtenstein writes, "Fad diets come and go, but the current one, intermittent fasting, crosses the line between what some have done through time as a necessity and what some have done as a result of upbringing." Lichtenstein says that the intent of the IF regimes is to trick the self into consuming a lesser amount of calories, and the approach is dependent on long-term adherence. Tonight I'll be presenting a speech to you about intermittent fasting and how it came to be of use today. First, I'll tell you some general intermittent fasting facts. Then I'll tell you about the origins of intermittent fasting and how it came to be of use. Next, I'll tell you how fasting is a sacred art. And finally, I'll tell you how intermittent fasting went from being seen as a negative thing to a positive thing in the public eye. Intermittent fasting is a new diet fad, but it actually has old roots and several potential health benefits. Jane E. Brody wrote an article for the Chicago Tribune titled "Hungry for Intermittent Fasting Facts," dated February 29th, 2020. According to Brody, Mark P. Madsen, neuroscientist for the National Institute of Aging, explained that the liver stores glucose, which the body uses for energy, before later turning to fat for energy. Madsen said it takes 10 to 12 hours for the body to deplete its glucose supply before a metabolic shift occurs, and then fat begins to be broken down. After meals, glucose is used for energy, and fat is stored in fat tissue. But during fasting, once glucose is depleted, fat is then broken down for energy. As told in the 2017 book, Keto for Cancer, by Miriam Kalamian, a medical scientist, all forms of fasting decrease blood glucose levels and insulin levels and improve insulin sensitivity levels. And during fasting, our cells economize activities to perform the same activities for a lesser amount of energy. The ketogenic diet first began to be developed when fasting was first observed for its possible benefits for treatments of epilepsy and other various diseases. In 1921, Dr. H.R. Galen, endocrinologist, presented evidence at a medical convention showing that fasting not only reconciled epilepsy, but it also reconciled damage from previous seizures. Roland Woodyatt, an independent researcher, studied carbohydrate metabolism and was the first to discover that ketone bodies were present in the body during 3 specific states: during fasting, starvation, and very low carbohydrate intake. Ketones lower the levels of inflammation that drive cachexia, or muscle wasting in the body, and help to spare lean muscle mass. Miriam Kalamian also added that before fasting, you should consult a medical research team if in the past you have experienced having a sluggish gallbladder or have experienced any eating disorders. Author Thomas Ryan, in his 2005 book, The Sacred Art of Fasting, Preparing to Fast, discusses the 4 virtues which make fasting a sacred art. The first virtue is prudence. Prudence is the virtue of good judgment, which is displayed when we begin to use our minds to take command of our bodies, to use their resources for health and good healing. The second virtue is fortitude, or courageousness under great difficulty, which is displayed during fasting when you must endure and fasting is outright difficult. The third virtue is temperance, which is moderation in all activities, which is displayed during eating when you must learn to control yourself and not be completely filled before leaving the table. The fourth virtue is justice, or the virtue of rendering to everyone his or her own dues, which is displayed during fasting when one must let go of his or her own self-control and gains a new, deeper level of consciousness and sense of solidarity with the rest of mankind. Author Walter van der Rijken and Ron Van Deth, in their 1994 book, From Fasting Saints to Anorexic Girls, tell about a past not so distant from this time now, in which people couldn't afford the luxury of dieting and everyday life was outright difficult. In times such as this, with famines occurring up until around the 19th century, the last thought on anyone's mind was wanting to be thin, and in their minds, being thin and fasting went hand in hand with death. During these times, men began to covet women of a fleshier body type than those of today's standards because they were seen as being healthier and stronger. Over time, though, a shift occurred when the food supply became greater, and the upper class lost its way of distinguishing itself from the lower class, and therefore sought to consume limited resourced food of more careful preparation to express their refinement. This created a shift over time which caused the upper class to eventually favor slenderness because it went hand in hand with their new way of eating, and it gave them a new way to distinguish themselves. In conclusion, intermittent fasting is a newly re-emerging diet with old roots and several potential health benefits. It hasn't always been a popular concept, but intermittent fasting has recently re-emerged into the mainstream due to the many illnesses of today's society. Many think of intermittent fasting simply as starving yourself to lose weight, but in fact, intermittent fasting not only boosts weight loss, but also aids in protecting lean muscle mass and preventing the consumption of lean muscle mass by cancerous cells in the body. Thank you.